We are really delighted that you are here with us for our wonderful speaker today, Danica Savonick of SUNY Cortland. We will get to Danica's introduction in a few minutes, probably less than that. But I wanted to introduce myself. I am Rupika Rizm. I am the PI for DEFCon, or the Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium. It's wonderful to see one of my co-PIs, Kasia Valens, who's here today. Kasia is a professor at Salem State University and the interim director. Kasia, where are you? Kasia's off camera. And the interim, are you the interim chief diversity officer?
Yeah, vice president of diversity and inclusion.
Kasia's fancy. So nice to see all of you. DEFCon is also run with our co-PIs, Tanisha Taylor at Texas Southern University, Jamila Moore-Pugh at Cal State Fullerton, and Sonia Donaldson at Colby College, previously at New Jersey City University when we started the grant. So we're delighted to have you here today. We will be running our speaker series throughout this year. It will be a combination of speakers like we have today, as well as workshops geared towards coming away with some hands-on expertise. Although knowing Danica, I know you'll come away with that from this talk as well, one way or the other. And we also have a reading group that we're running throughout the year where we are collectively reading the wonderful book, Digital Pedagogy in the Humanities, which is edited by, among other people, one of our DEFCon mentors, Kathy Harris. So we will be meeting monthly to read that. We will also be launching the next incarnation of our re-grant program, our fellowship program, to support the work of members of our community. So look for more information about that. And then our virtual annual meeting, which will take place late next year. So I will drop the link in the chat to our website where you can get all of this information and more. And now I want to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Danica Savonick. I have had the fortune of knowing Danica since, I want to say, 2015, when she took a class that I was teaching with Misha Cardenas at HILT, which is a Digital Humanities Institute, Humanities Initiative. I'm not going to tell you the acronym, but I'll put a link in the chat. But HILT is a wonderful initiative for taking a class on learning DH, and Danica was in my class. So I got to meet her then, and it's been really exciting to see all the wonderful work she's been doing and how she's become a leader in digital pedagogy. She was one of our mentors last year, and we're thrilled she's speaking with us. So let me give you the official bio, which is that Danica Savonick is an ACLS fellow and an assistant professor of English at SUNY Cortland. Her research and teaching focus on 20th century and contemporary U.S. literature, feminist pedagogy, and social justice. She is currently completing a much-awaited book manuscript, Insurgent Knowledge, The Poetics and Pedagogy of Toni Cade Bambara, June Jordan, and Audre Lorde and Adrienne Rich in the Era of Open Admissions, which is very recently under contract at Duke University Press, which we're very excited about. Her work has appeared in American Literature, Minimalist, Digital Humanities Quarterly, and Modern Fiction Studies, as well as in Inside Higher Ed and The Chronicle. She is the editor of the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy and a member of the Haystack.org steering committee. You can find her on Twitter at Danica Savonick. So I will turn this over to Danica, who will talk and also will run her own Q&A, allegedly, as I've been instructed not to run a Q&A. So thank you so much, Danica. We are so delighted you're here.
Thank you so much, Rupsi, for that really generous introduction. And thank you to everyone at DEFCon who made this talk today possible. And thank you all for being here. I know you have so much going on. I'm really excited and honored to be here today talking about strategies for teaching digital ethnic studies, especially at schools that don't really have many resources for doing so. And I love getting to talk with everyone here at DEFCon because this program has really meant a lot to me over the past year. It's been such a joy to be part of this initiative and part of this community. And I've really learned so much from everyone, especially my mentees, Jaewon Woo and Thea Tagle, who most certainly taught me just as much as I taught them. So I'm going to start a timer to make sure I don't ramble on. My talk today is called Teaching DH on a Shoestring. And it has 3 parts. So in part 1, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the challenges and opportunities of teaching DH at under-resourced institutions, and I'll highlight some relevant research on this topic. Then in part 2, I'll focus on 7 strategies for what I've been thinking of as minimalist DH pedagogy, especially in relation to course design. And then in part 3, I will talk about some ways that we can implement these principles in the design of digital project assignments. And I also want to acknowledge upfront that there is a tremendous wealth of knowledge in this Zoom room about this very subject. So my hope is at the end, we can kind of turn this hierarchical talk into a more collaborative conversation in which we're sharing insights and knowledge on this topic. Just a few other logistical notes. The link to the slides, if you see anything here that you want to revisit later, it's at bit.ly/th-shoestring. And also the material in this presentation is going to be appearing in an article in the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy sometime in the next 6 months to a year. So if I go too quickly through anything, you should be able to find it there. I've also, if you go to this link, you'll see that in the presentation notes and the speaker notes, I've tried to link to a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking to. But if I've missed anything, please feel free to email me, find me on Twitter, and I'm happy to provide you with any resources. All right, so part 1, teaching DH at under-resourced institutions. So today we know the educational benefits of studying digital humanities. We know that studying digital humanities helps increase students' digital literacy. It teaches students to think critically about how technology shapes social, cultural, and political life. It encourages students to question the material conditions, such as labor and environmental impact, that underlie shiny new technologies. And it helps students gain transferable skills such as coding, project management, collaboration, and digital publishing. And these are the kinds of skills that we know are valuable not only to future employers, but they'll be useful to students more broadly in their lives as activists, artists, and engaged citizens, which we know our students are. So I imagine part of what brings us here today is a shared belief that these kinds of experiences should be available not only to students at elite universities, but to all students, regardless of the kind of institution that they attend. Though access to college has increased dramatically in the past 50 years, disparities in the kind of institutions students attend and what they study has actually intensified along the lines of race and class. More so now than at any point in history, affluent white students are channeled into elite, exclusive, and well-funded institutions such as private schools and the flagship campuses of state universities, where they have access to small class sizes, personalized instruction, and are encouraged to study a broad liberal arts curriculum. By contrast, we know that working class students and students of color are tracked into drastically underfunded institutions, especially community colleges, which have fewer full-time instructors, larger class sizes. We know the teaching loads are higher at these schools, and where students are often steered towards pre-professional vocational education. So I'm sure some of you remember Matt Gold's MLA talk, which was later published as a blog post called Whose Revolution? Towards a More Equitable Digital Humanities. In this talk, Gold sounded the alarm about the ways that DH funding was contributing to these disparities through its concentration at elite research-intensive universities. Though it's a bit difficult to find precise information about where exactly DH courses are taught, data from Gold's Degrees in Digital Humanities GitHub repository suggests that the vast majority, roughly 87%, of the schools that offer DH programs are research-focused and/or private universities. At these schools, teaching loads are lower, class sizes are smaller, and there's often greater funding for technical support, equipment, physical space, librarians, and support staff. Yet if digital humanities is taught primarily in elite and exclusive institutions, it can actually reproduce or even exacerbate existing inequities by equipping more affluent and predominantly white students with extensive digital skills, while students at under-resourced institutions fall farther behind. So today we'll be talking about what I've been thinking of as minimalist DH pedagogy, strategies for teaching digital ethnic studies courses at schools that don't have many resources for doing so. At the broadest level, this involves making strategic decisions about course design, educational technologies, assignments that maximize learning while minimizing stress, barriers of access, and time for both instructors and students. So for the purposes of today's talk, I'll be focusing on ways that we can use free, low cost, and open source tools and platforms to help students increase their digital literacy, including their awareness of the ways that technologies both reproduce and can challenge conditions of inequality. While we often imagine that the average college student is someone between the ages of 18 and 22 who's living on campus and focusing primarily on school, we know that this profile describes an ever smaller fraction of actual students. Today, 77% of undergraduates attend public universities, and nearly 35% are enrolled in community colleges. 33% are above the age of 24, and the average age is 26.4. 40% are first-generation students, and 33.6% receive Pell Grants. More than 70% of college students work while enrolled in college, and 40% work at least 30 hours per week. And only about 50% of college students are attending full-time. In contrast to their elite university counterparts, we know that students at less exclusive institutions are more likely to be low income, the first in their families to attend college, returning adults, veterans, and students of color. At these schools, students often commute rather than live on campus and work full or part-time outside of class. They can't always afford functioning laptops, high-speed internet connections, or unlimited data plans, and often their levels of preparation for college-level work vary widely. Yet there are also some less tangible, more difficult to quantify aspects to consider. Some examples include students' perceptions of their own technological inability and a lack of either prior experience with or institutional buzz surrounding digital humanities. And these are the material conditions that we need to keep in mind as we think about DH pedagogy. So most of the examples I'm going to share today are drawn from my own experiences teaching at Queens College, which is part of the CUNY system, and more recently at SUNY Cortland. But I want to also highlight some of the really excellent research out there that has shaped my thinking about this topic. As you may have already guessed, I've been inspired by Alex Gill and Rupika's work on minimal computing, and I want to shout out to their recent and very useful issue of Digital Humanities Quarterly on this subject. Gill defines minimal computing as computing done under some set of significant constraints of hardware, software, education, network capacity, power, or other factors. And as someone who's only ever taught at under-resourced institutions, it's always struck me that this is the work that we do every day as we're figuring out how to teach DH. In addition, I've been inspired by Jade Davis's work on frugal innovation. Her 4 principles for meaningful and accessible digital innovation include: number 1, simplify; number 2, make it fun, both for faculty to learn and students to engage as part of the learning; number 3, show relevance in learning and beyond; and number 4, the goal is always small cost to students, including time, equipment, stigma, etc. So for those who want to learn more about this, here's some of the really great research out there on this topic, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of these in particular. In both her essay and website on teaching DH at community colleges, Anne McBrail demonstrates how experiments with distant reading, long-term multimodal projects, and scaffolded interactive assignments provide opportunities for community college students to become active knowledge producers and facilitate the kind of social and cultural integration that students at elite colleges gain through extracurriculars. McGrail discusses the importance of not overwhelming students with unnecessarily complex assignments that might catalyze self-doubt. She also writes that because students' average age is 29, it's important to affirm the already existing knowledge and histories of learning that they bring to the classroom as a kind of bridge to digital work. I've also been really influenced by David Jack Norton's work. And for Norton, the key to teaching DH at community colleges is designing sustainable, efficient, and reproducible workflows. And that's his term for the entire process of creating, teaching, and assessing assignments. So though some might hear in efficiency the squawks of the neoliberal university, Norton reminds us that this is a necessary strategy for navigating the large class sizes and high teaching loads one finds at community colleges. Norton puts this into perspective by highlighting how at his institution, just 5 additional minutes spent per student on assessing an assignment can yield an additional 13 hours of grading per week. And I really like the way that he kind of puts those material conditions into perspective for us. So with all of these ideas in mind, time for part 2, which is 7 strategies for minimalist course design. As I talk about these strategies, I'll be referencing a course that I teach called Digital Divides, Race, Class, and Gender in the Age of the Internet. This is a course I've taught several times, both in person and online. It explores how digital tools and platforms both reproduce and challenge conditions of inequality, especially related to race, class, gender, and sexuality. It aims to help students increase their digital literacy and to become advocates for digital justice. And I'm using this course as an example because its structure and assignments can be easily adapted for courses on topics like Black DH, digital Black feminism, or digital ethnic studies. And you are more than welcome to adapt, remix, use, borrow anything that I talk about here. The bit.ly link on the slides is for the syllabus. So if you go to bit.ly/divide syllabus, that should take you to, I think, the fall 2019 syllabus for the course. So here's a simplified version of what the course looks like, kind of boiled down to into its 6 main units. It begins with a unit on the politics of platforms. Then we do a section where we look at Donna Haraway's work on situated knowledges, and students do a Wikipedia editing assignment. Then we do a set of readings on labor. And about halfway through the course, students are introduced to digital humanities. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then it has a section on student-led lessons, and all of that kind of builds up towards students creating their own final projects. Though this is technically a 400 level seminar, minimal prerequisite requirements mean that it attracts a wide range of students. I also do want to note that my regional comprehensive university does afford the benefit of relatively small class sizes, with just 20 students or so. So I've tried throughout the talk to incorporate ways that the strategies that I talk about can be adapted for other situations and contexts. All right, so principle number 1, very easy, something that all of us can do, it costs nothing. Organize courses around topics that matter to students. So at teaching-focused institutions, it's likely that our students haven't heard of digital humanities. Instead of organizing the course around a subject that many students were unfamiliar with, I instead organize this course around topics that they do care about, namely questions of justice and equity. So the course description for Digital Divide states, is Google racist? Is Wikipedia sexist? In this course, we will critically reflect on the digital tools and platforms that mediate so much of our daily lives. More specifically, we will explore how digital technologies can reproduce and challenge conditions of racial, class, and gender inequality. So by really focusing on that digital ethnic studies component of the course, I think we can signal to students who care about social justice that our courses will be places to explore the things that they're interested in, and the technology component can come second. And that relates to number 2, which is assuaging anxieties surrounding technological expertise. According to recent research, the last 2 generations of students are high-functioning consumers and users of digital technology rather than fluent critical users of digital tools. Though my students are aware of how large a role the technologies play in their lives, they're also quick to admit how little they know about them. One way we can alleviate these anxieties is by explicitly addressing them. So the description of Digital Divides lets students know that this course is perfect for beginners. No advanced knowledge of digital technologies is necessary. Another helpful strategy is making increasing our digital literacy an explicit goal for the course. I always tell students up front that the only guarantee is that things are going to go wrong throughout the semester. Whether they're learning how to use WordPress or figuring out how to edit Wikipedia pages, things are inevitably going to be confusing. Tools and platforms are not going to work the way that they ought to. Students are going to encounter dead ends. But by making increasing our digital literacy a course goal, We can help students recognize these obstacles and the strategies that they develop for navigating them as part of the learning process. Number 3, begin with relevant text that gives students new perspectives on their everyday lives. Digital Divides begins with books like Safiya Noble's Algorithms of Oppression and Virginia Eubanks's Automating Inequality, which highlight the often invisible ways that platforms mediate our everyday lives in ways that can reproduce dominant hierarchies. These readings establish a sense of urgency for the course, a sense that what students will learn this semester matters. And many are, to use their own terms, shook by these revelations about just how deeply automated decision-making and algorithms shape our daily lives. As early as the 3rd week of class, students begin to ask questions like, why do people with authority in Google not address the situation of racism and conduct more exams on their search engines? Which of course opens up a whole range of questions about how capitalism mediates our online experiences. So starting out with really compelling readings or viewings or listenings is a way to increase student interest and investment, which they then carry with them throughout the semester. Number 4, help students identify their intellectual investments in the course material. In Digital Divides, I use a blog post, comments, and facilitation assignment to help students identify their intellectual investments. As we read research about social media, algorithms, and surveillance technologies, these assignments create opportunities for students to connect these readings to their own particular experiences, situations, and contexts. In their blogs and comments, students generate the observations and ideas they might later build on in their projects. So for example, my students have shared stories about the unreliable internet connections in their rural home communities and about how the college's surveillance software identified a fake ID scam on campus. Through these assignments, students identify potential applications and extensions of the research that we're reading, and they begin asking deeper questions about digital platforms, some of which have the potential to turn into highly original research projects. So a few quick logistics about these assignments. These blogs, facilitations, and comments are a major focus of our course. Depending on the level of the course and the number of students, they're worth anywhere from 30 to 75% of students' final grades. For most classes, 2 students write blogs about the assigned readings and then serve as in-class discussion leaders. Their blogs can focus on whatever interests them, and we discuss how good blog posts help us see an aspect of the reading in a more complex and nuanced way. Every other student leaves a comment on at least one of the blogs by the time we get to class, and we talk about how effective comments advance the conversation, often by bringing in an additional example that either further supports or complicates the blog author's main point. In class, the 2 bloggers stand in front of the classroom and they each teach a 10-minute lesson related to their post. And we call these facilitations rather than presentations to emphasize their interactive nature. And in the article version of this talk, I discussed a little bit about how and why I use WordPress for our class website and for these assignments, as well as some of the ways that it can be adapted for an institutional LMS, since I know a lot of instructors can't deviate from the required LMS. Yet we also need to consider how to evaluate these kinds of assignments, since they can leave us, depending on our teaching loads, with upwards of 10 blog posts and 70 comments to read prior to each class. These assignments generate a lot of writing. So I've navigated this by providing written feedback on only 2 comments throughout the semester and using a rubric for all others. This allows you to choose whether you want to spread out the evaluation workload by selecting different days to provide written feedback for different classes, or concentrating this written feedback on a few particular days, blocking them off for grading as we would for a midterm or a final. In addition, though I don't always have time to closely read each comment prior to class, I try to highlight at least 2 comments to incentivize students' thoughtful commenting. And often the facilitators will incorporate other students' comments into their facilitation, and we'll talk about them more deeply in class. All right, number 5, let's see. This one is my favorite. Organize course units around praxis, the testing and generation of ideas through practice. In their keyword entry on praxis, Lindblad, Novisky, and Boggs write that praxis-oriented pedagogy helps students engage with theory through concrete action. One way we can encourage praxis is by pairing readings or viewings or listenings with small activities and assignments that challenge students to test out these ideas by experimenting with different digital tools. So in McGrail's essay in Debates in Digital Humanities, she includes two examples of these. One involves crowdsourcing and digital labor, which results in a public policy paper, and another on search engines that helps students explore filter bubbles and choice architecture. I also want to highlight some examples from DEFCon fellow Jaewon Woo's course on Intro to Black Digital Humanities. This is a completely online course for students at Lorain County Community College in Ohio, which Woo developed as part of the DEFCon program and very kindly gave me permission to talk about today. As you'll see, Woo developed a really gorgeous interactive scalar website complete with accessible readings and praxis-based assignments on topics such as Black Lives Matter and social media and distant reading of runaway slave advertisements. So the course opens with readings on race in digital space, including articles on digital blackface, and then asks students to write a digital autoethnography in which they critically reflect on their practices of self-representation online. Then later in the semester, in her unit on Black Lives Matter and social media, students read research on social media and social movements, and then analyze a particular trend related to the Black Lives Matter hashtag on a platform of their choice. And I think this course is a really wonderful and useful model of how praxis-based learning can be implemented in a community college setting and for an online course. In Digital Divides, we do a unit on situated knowledges and Wikipedia, in which students read Donna Haraway's foundational essay on feminist epistemology alongside articles on bias on Wikipedia, and then explore these ideas by attempting to edit or create their own Wikipedia pages. While Wikipedia might seem like it contains objective facts, these readings help introduce students to the idea that the content there actually reflects the standpoints of those who are authoring the content, whom we know are disproportionately white men from English-speaking countries in the global north. Though creating a Wikipedia assignment can initially be time-consuming, it's then relatively easy to reproduce in other courses. And for those who might be interested in doing so, the Wiki Education nonprofit organization provides extensive support and a designated liaison to assist you with setting up the project. And there's also a lot of articles and other online resources to guide you in that process. And I'd be happy to share more of those if that's something you're interested in. Number 6, create opportunities for students to design a portion of the course. So as we know from research, students learn best when they're making decisions about the content and methods of their learning. So in addition to leading facilitations, another way we can encourage this is by dividing students into groups and having them design and teach course sessions on a topic of their choosing. In Digital Divides, we dedicate a week of in-class time to research and preparation, and another 2 weeks for students' lessons, though more would be warranted if you can spare it. Sample topics that students have selected range from identifying fake news and media bias to LGBTQ+ discrimination on dating apps. So each group is responsible for every component of the lesson. First, they read a wide range of sources, from scholarly research to news articles, podcasts, TED Talks, that kind of thing, to select the most informative, reliable, and relevant material to assign to their peers for homework. Often these readings are coupled with small praxis-based experiments. So for example, the group who focused on accessibility and universal design asked us to apply key concepts from disability studies to everyday digital practice by running accessibility checks on websites. Next, students develop a plan for teaching this material to the class, and we discuss various methods for doing so. And then each group teaches an entire 50-minute course period. And with larger classes, you can obviously divide that in half and have one group responsible for like a 25-minute course period. And through this process, students develop strategies for tracking down reliable information on new subjects, conveying ideas to others, collaboration, public speaking, and project management. They're also just really fun because students get to decide, what we're talking about, and they're really motivated because they're the ones selecting the content and the material. Number 7, utilize group work to teach collaboration. So student-led lessons are just one example of how we can incorporate group work into our courses. Group work is a key strategy for minimalist pedagogy because it helps students develop skills for effective collaboration, it results in better projects, and it decreases the volume of the work that we must evaluate, thus allowing us to increase the depth of the feedback and the attention that we can give to student work. Yet for this to happen, we have to structure the collaboration process to ensure successful outcomes. And I try to always start from the premise that we don't inherently know how to equitably distribute work and to work effectively with others, right? Why would we when so much of our education teaches us to compete rather than collaborate with the students sitting next to us? Instead, we can treat collaboration as a skill, like writing a thesis statement, something that students can get better at with practice. So in class, I always use a version of Guidelines for Successful Collaboration, which is adapted from Arola Ball and Shepard's book, Writer Designer. And we discuss strategies for dividing up large projects into smaller components, strategies for equitably distributing work, and setting deadlines for various components of a project. And students, of course, always have additional ideas based on their own experiences, their previous collaborative assignments, about what makes for a good collaboration. So we're becomes a living document that we're always adding to and updating. In addition, for any collaborative assignment, students reflect on their collaboration by writing a collaboration evaluation. And this can be just like a simple 10-minute warm-up writing exercise where students reflect both on their own contributions to whatever the project or assignment is, as well as their peers' contributions. And that brings me to part 3, a minimalist approach to DH project assignments. So today, collaborative projects are one of the most common features of DH pedagogy, and for good reason. In addition to honoring the experiential knowledge that students bring to the classroom, extensive research has demonstrated that such assignments increase student motivation, learning, and the quality of their work. In Tanya Clement's words, digital projects increase students' sense of creative control and desire to participate in society. Kathy Davidson calls this making a public contribution to knowledge. So for now, I want to focus on how we can design these assignments, both for teaching-focused institutions and in ways that prompt deeper critical engagement with broader issues related to data, privacy, digital identity, accessibility, surveillance capitalism, digital justice, and the politics and ethics of technologies. All of the questions that are really at the heart of digital ethnic studies courses. So in thinking about how to design these assignments, there are some factors we're going to want to consider. These include students' distinct learning styles and their skill levels with different technologies, which we know, of course, vary. We want to think about the materials, such as the hardware, software, bandwidth, and equipment that students have access to, both on campus and at home. And then finally, the time that students have to complete the assignment, and especially how much will be completed inside or outside of class. So we know that in 2020, 40% of full-time students and 74% of part-time students held jobs while attending college. So we want to make sure that we're designing these assignments in ways that position all students to succeed, not just those who have fewer obligations beyond the classroom. For students who might be juggling multiple jobs as well as family obligations, we know that scheduling in-class time to work on these projects is paramount, and that when possible, reserving the computer lab is also a great practice. And then I've also worked around that if computer labs aren't available by having students bring in laptops and doubling up into pairs or groups if computers are in short supply. So digital project assignments can take many forms, a few of which are listed here. It can be creating something for the college community. It might look like co-authoring a piece of public writing. It might be, number 3, creating a digital resource for a particular audience or community. It might involve contributing to an existing digital humanities project, something like colored conventions. Number 5, improving an existing digital resource like the Wikipedia assignments I mentioned. Number 6, creating a particular product which might relate to the broader goals of a course. So making a map in a geography course or a digital exhibition for an art history course. And then the last one, which I'm going to focus on now, would be open-ended projects. So that rather than dictating the form, the final product that they're going to make, this kind of project asks students to select a digital platform and create something based on something that they have learned that semester in the course. And I'm going to focus on these because they're the easiest to adapt across different courses and contexts, these open-ended projects. So I like these open-ended projects for several reasons. Number one, they create space for student creativity. Number two, they encourage students to think critically about which platform they'll select to fit the goals of their project, which we know is a key component of digital literacy. Number three, these open-ended projects are well suited for students with a range of different skill levels, abilities, and comfort with technology. They allow students to determine whether they'll use the project as an opportunity to learn a new tool or platform, or create something using a platform that they're already familiar and comfortable with. And then finally, these assignments are easy to reuse and adapt for other courses, which is especially important for instructors with high teaching loads. So in Digital Divides, students select their own form. I suggest a website, a podcast, a timeline, a lesson plan, and they choose an appropriate platform for their project. And one key requirement for this assignment is that their project be something that is useful, ideally to an audience beyond our classroom. So the setup for the assignment begins on the first day of class when students are informed that the course will conclude with a collaborative final project, just so it's kind of sitting there in the back of their minds throughout the semester. In addition, we look at examples of projects created by former students so they can start thinking about what kind of project they might create at the end of the course. Then, about halfway through the semester, I introduce students to the field of digital humanities. And the reason I wait until the middle is so that this can become less like an intimidating new term and more a way to describe the work that they've already been doing throughout the semester. And the definition of DH that we used is adapted from Kathleen Fitzpatrick's, and that is that DH involves, on the one hand, using digital tools and methods to perform humanities research, as well as number two, analyzing technologies by asking humanistic questions about power, representation, ethics, politics, labor, etc. We also use Rupsi's book, New Digital Worlds, to think about the digital cultural record and the way that it both reproduces and challenges existing power hierarchies. So the next phase in kind of setting up the project is to review an existing DH project related to social justice. So I provide options based on students' interests, and they're welcome to find their own. They then write a review of the project and present it to the class. And one of the things I'm planning to do in future iterations is to assign some examples from reviews in DH, so students have a model for what these project reviews can look like. So the review sets up the project assignment, which has 3 stages. The first is a tool parade. The second involves the drafting of proposals, voting on top choices, and organizing into groups. And then the final step is planning and executing the project. And I've found that about 4 weeks is necessary for a project that includes a proposal, a rough draft, peer review, and the submission and presentation of final projects. But definitely more would be warranted if you can spare it within the course. So the first step is what Jessie Sommel calls a tool parade, which introduces students to a range of potential platforms that they might use for their project. Over the course of 30 minutes, students are introduced to about 8 platforms with time at the end for them to do additional research on 1 or 2 that interest them. And pictured here is the note-taking format that I suggest students use as we evaluate the affordances and limitations of different platforms in order to select the most appropriate one for their project. And as part of this tool parade, we distinguish between form, as in the type of project, right? Like a podcast, website, timeline, or a blog post, and platform or software that they'll then use to create the project. And key here is the notion that different platforms can be used to produce a particular kind of product. So for instance, a timeline could be created using the open source timeline.js or a proprietary platform like Tiki-Taki. And this tool parade creates opportunities for us to discuss, okay, what is the difference between a proprietary platform and an open source platform? What are the benefits and limitations of each of those? So following the rapid presentation of options, students then work independently to do further research on potential platforms that they might use. And we use 2 sets of questions to guide these activities. So the first set guides students through a sort of rhetorical analysis of the platforms that they're looking at so that they can think about the various choices that will be available to them as they create their own projects, right? So what are the conventions of the platform? How is information organized? How is media incorporated? Questions like that. The second set of questions guides students in critically analyzing these platforms in relation to broader questions about data, privacy, and power. And my goal is to help students understand that platforms are not ideologically neutral and to consider the material conditions that underlie them. So these are questions like who created this platform, when, why, who funds the platform, who profits from the platform. And this encourages broader awareness of the ways that profit shapes our online experiences, which is a central theme of the course. What software was used to create this platform? What is the platform's privacy policy? How does it treat users' data? So we discussed the old adage that if you're not the customer, then you're the product. What terms are you agreeing to if you sign up for this platform, right? So these are the kind of questions that I'm hoping students will ask in the future as they're encountering new tools and platforms, even beyond the context of our course. So to take just one example, my students are often eager to publish their work on haystack.org, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It's a free nonprofit academic social network and blogging platform that allows students to share their work with its 16,000 network members. So often we'll do a close reading of Haystack's privacy policy, we'll look at their legal agreement and discuss how their commitment to never selling users' data contrasts with other social media platforms. So as you can see, I'm really interested in the ways that we can take these digital project assignments and not just teach students to use one or two new tools and platforms, but actually shape the way that they're thinking with and engaging with platforms more generally. So the tool parade prepares students to write a project proposal in which they identify the aims, audience impact, type of project, platform, and a work plan. They vote on their top choices and organize into groups. They're encouraged but not required to work in groups. In their proposals, that they can provide a compelling reason why the project can best be completed as an individual, then they're free to work on it individually. And then finally, students plan and execute their projects. This involves co-working sessions in the computer lab, the submission of rough drafts, peer review, and the presentation of final projects. And pictured here is the chart that I use to help us all keep track of the materials related to the project. While students are often eager to undertake public projects, we do have to help them understand the potential risks of doing so. And I rely on these 4 guidelines written by Kevin Smith, who was the Director of Copyright and Scholarly Communications at Duke. So his steps include, number 1, informing students about the public nature of assignments early on and providing opportunities for them to speak with us about issues of privacy. Number 2, allowing them to use an alias or a pseudonym. Number 3, reminding students not to post private information such as their dorm location or social security number. And 4, providing alternative ways that they can fulfill class requirements. So my goal is always to help students make informed decisions about how much of their identity they want to disclose. We have conversations about the implications of using their real names, talking about how their public writing will appear in search results for years to come, including those of potential employers, internet trolls, and immigration officials. We discuss the implications of publishing with their real names or using a pseudonym, omitting their names altogether, or choosing an alternative option that won't be public. So one major benefit of these projects is that they create space for conversations about accessibility and the ways that students' design choices might impact the audiences they're hoping to reach, including those differently positioned amidst intersecting axes of power. So often we'll discuss the creative and critical precepts for DH projects document, which I've linked to here, which helps students think about how to design a project that will be accessible to a wide range of users. So some of the questions include how accessible is the project for people with disabilities? How accessible is the project in low bandwidth environments, right? So if students are creating a podcast, we can talk about what the benefits of including a transcript would be and how that would open their project to a wider range of audiences. On the final day of class, and I'm almost done here, I promise, I know I've been speaking for a long time. I always present students with a public digital gallery of their projects to visualize everything that they've done. This landing page creates a space where students can interact with each other's projects and share them with their friends, family, as part of graduate school applications or with potential future employers as evidence of their editing, writing, project management, and digital publishing skills. Just because I love sharing student work. Here are some of the projects that came out of the fall 2019 version of this course. One group decided to use what they had learned to explore the exploitative conditions, labor conditions in Apple's Foxconn factories. They made an activist art project in which they redesigned the packaging of an iPhone box to tell the story of the true path of the iPhone. Another group created a series of lesson plans about technology and the sexualization of young women online, which they encouraged other educators to use via Haystack. And another student created an interactive twine storytelling game that explores the emotional experiences of grief in an age when the digital leaves traces of everything. Last point I'll make. One of the most effective and essentially free things that we can do as instructors is to help students reflect on and articulate what they've learned. So my courses always conclude with a course rationale assignment where I explain to students why we did each of the assignments and what I hope they would gain from it. And then for their final assignment, they write a reflection on the course, what they learned, what they'll take away, what they'll continue working on, and how they would change the assignment in the future. So I won't read this, but just know that the assignment rationale for that final project is up here if anyone wants to use it or borrow language from it. So hopefully this has given you a small taste of some of the ways that we can teach digital ethnic studies without DH librarians, grant fundings, or labs, and sometimes even without functioning faucets. While this minimalist approach won't solve the problems of unequal resource allocation in our tiered system of higher ed, I hope we can think together about ways to provisionally navigate these conditions in order to prepare our students both to navigate the world and to change it. Thank you. All right. Thank you all for bearing with me. I would like now, if we're able, to switch over to this collaborative Google Doc where we can take some notes together and brainstorm about this topic. Don't worry if you're not able to have up both the Zoom and the Google Doc. We'll make it so that you can just type any answers and ideas into the chat box, and then we'll talk about everything collectively. So for those who are able, if you could go to, oh, thanks Rupsi for putting that in the chat, bit.ly/shoestring-notes. That's going to take us to this doc. Hopefully I can scroll up a bit. There we go. So yeah, I'm curious to hear from you all. I can set a timer maybe for like 90 seconds or so, but I'd love to hear what is one lingering question, thought, or idea that you have about teaching DH at under-resourced institutions. This is such a broad topic, right? And I know we all have so many different experiences and different facets of this broader question. So I'll stop talking and just set a timer for 90 seconds. Feel free to type responses directly in the Google Doc, which many of you are doing, or directly into the Zoom chat if that's easier. All right, if everyone could just finish up the thought that you're working on. These are really great. Thank you for sharing these. All right, so I'll start talking through a few of them, and I'd like to invite others to jump in and weigh in with your expertise, because I think we have so much of it in this room and so much to learn from each other. So let's see. The first one says, as a librarian, much of my teaching is one-off sessions, classroom visits to do an intro to DH or a taste of DH through a 1 or 2 session assignment or activity. Would be interested in any approaches you may have to this kind of session. Oh, that's really interesting. I do think the tool parade is pretty easily replicable in other contexts that might be something to look into. That was something that Jesse Stommel created. And I will make the PowerPoint accessible so that you can have the link to all of that. But that might be a good place to start. Does anyone else have ideas? I know Roopsie does stuff like this, and so do many of you. Ideas about one-off sessions. Okay, well, if anything comes up, feel free to type directly into the document. We can have this be like a living document that we're responding to. Also, just interrupt me, raise your hand, type in the chat if you'd like to talk. Maybe Roopsie can help me moderate.
I was just gonna say, actually, like, I'm not familiar with this like librarian one-off DH, actually. I'm surprised and interested and intrigued, but I mean, I'm used to like the one-off, like, here just how you use the database, but this is very interesting because it's sort of
that was my question. And yeah, I get asked to do this a lot. Just a professor will ask me to come in, and they're doing a intro to grad studies class, or a literature class, or even an intro to DH class, but that doesn't happen very often here. And they want to introduce their students to digital humanities, and they can afford like 1 session, sometimes 2. So we sometimes, we just do it different ways, depending on if it's an undergrad class or graduate class. Sometimes it's more just an overview of the field and resources and publications and things like that. And sometimes it's just a simple, like a story map assignment or timeline, just to get their hands on it. But I don't know. I don't ever find that they're super effective. I don't know really what the students are. And we get good feedback, but I don't know if there's like what kind of impact that has.
Yeah, in a way, it reminds me of this a question, this third bullet point. What happens, or how do you navigate situations in which the tech goes beyond your level of expertise? And the reason I think they're related, right, is because in like a one-off session, as you said, you might be able to get them some hands-on experience doing a story map or something. But what we're really teaching is like a process of what questions you would ask and how you would go about doing a digital project. But they're ultimately going to be the ones who are teaching themselves the ins and outs of the platforms. We can be a resource and a sounding board for them, but I think the more we can emphasize the process and the kinds of questions and the kinds of research projects, expose them to what's out there. Ultimately, with a lot of these projects, even though the students in my class who choose to use Twine, I don't teach them Twine, right? They get really excited about the project. They see some examples of Twine and they decide that they're excited enough about it. I try to caution them about like the varying skill levels that they'll need to engage with different platforms, but they're the ones who become responsible for teaching it to themselves, and because their interest is what's motivating the project. Ryan Horn, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just building off that, because I work in the library and we do a lot of these one-offs, as I'm sure you do. And one thing we've done is really not focus on the tech side very much, because we spend a lot of our time like trying to install different softwares or see why someone can't access something. And so we'll focus more on, as you're saying, like the process, or here's an assignment where you can maybe use a Jupyter notebook that we've set up in Google or something, just trying to really make it so it's kind of a drag, like just drop in. Here you can type on this thing and focus again more on like the process of learning, or this is where you can find the resources later. And once the one-off is over, here's where you can find us and help you install the thing. So that's where we've been kind of inverting the Carpentries approach in that way.
Yeah, that sounds like a really fantastic model. I wanted to talk about number 2. Any tips for getting students past the suspicion stage of collaborative assignments? The good ones worry they'll do most of the work, and that the shirkers will get away with sharing a final grade with little or no effort. And I see Roopsie's jumping in and starting to respond with some suggestions. Everyone else, feel free to do that as well if you have ideas about how to address these. Roopsie mentioned using contract grading to alleviate the worry. I think that's really great. I've found it interesting how far I can go to initially at the beginning be like, raise your hand if you've ever had a collaborative project where you got stuck doing all the work and everyone got the grade. So just letting students know that you're aware that this terrible phenomenon is out there and it happens to all of us, and that you're going to be there and you're going to help scaffold that collaboration process so that that doesn't end up happening, right? So I talked about the collaboration, the guidelines for successful collaboration, the contract grading is great, the reflection at the end on what did you contribute, what did everyone else contribute, knowing that that's coming, that students are ultimately going to be weighing in on that at the end, really helps to increase the involvement and motivation. And also I try to, if possible, check in with groups of students every few classes, say, okay, what are you doing for homework? What's each student doing for homework? And then they become accountable to one another and checking in at the beginning of each class. Greg, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that I've been using contract grading, but I've been using like a guided self-assessment, and one of the things that we do for that is to involve students in the offering of the criteria, right? And what you were talking about during the talk kind of reminded me of that. But this was actually my question, because I'm thinking, okay, I'm doing that, right? And then I'm doing this other thing, like, and devoting how much class time, like what I would really love to do with the groups, because they're working in pairs this semester, is to say, hey, come up with, expectations in your pairs for who's going to do what, and devote class time to that. But then, I also at some point need to teach them tech writing. So I'm like, thinking about kind of picking battles, I think. And I think that might be a kind of resonant theme, like when you're thinking about DH on a shoestring, like what do you prioritize, I guess, in terms of what you can set up and sustain.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I would again invite you to continue responding to some of these. Maybe we'll do one more, or do you want to cut off now, Roopsie? What do you think?
I mean, I think we can probably do one more, but understanding people may have to leave because of the timing.
Yeah. Totally. Rapid last one. What I was going to ask you to do after this was down here, which was to contribute something. Oh, and you're all already doing this. You're so wonderful. Contributing a resource, a book, an article, a strategy, something that you found really useful for teaching DH on a shoestring. Maybe your contribution can be just like answering one of the questions from this top section, since we haven't gotten to everything. I'll just really quickly read bullet point 4. So much of the talk focused on course time and instructor labor. How much time do you devote overall to scaffolding when you introduce assessment and collaboration policies and concepts that may be new to students or to presentations? I mention these because the balance between content and policy, as though those two things can be separated, is on my mind right now. Yeah, and I think, it always varies depending on the level of the course, right? If it's an introductory level, intro to multicultural literature class, we might spend a different amount of time than in a project like the one, or in a class like the one I talked about. Digital Divides is really dedicated to these questions and like teaching skills like collaboration and project management. So that kind of creates a bit more space to dive into those questions. But a lot of this stuff can just be, a 15-minute discussion at the beginning of class related to collaboration. It doesn't have to, take up the entire class period. But I agree that it's a delicate balance, and it's something that we're always negotiating based on our sense of kind of where students are at. You could take a survey or inventory of like what they're nervous about in relation to the project, how they feel about collaborative projects at the beginning. So you can kind of gauge what kind of strategies they already have for project management. So that might allow you to kind of gauge how much instruction and scaffolding needs to be placed around the assignment. The very last thing I'll say, besides thank you all for participating and being a really, really wonderful audience. I know this is a huge topic and something that like this Zoom room has a lot of expertise on. So if this is a topic that you might be interested in speaking about at not this upcoming MLA, but the future one, MLA 2024, I'm hoping to put together something on teaching DH at under-resourced institutions, teaching DH on a shoestring, minimalist DH pedagogy. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Danica. This was absolutely, absolutely amazing. and it was such a wonderful treat. And the video will soon be available. He wants to revisit it and relive like the glory, because this is just so rich and so exciting. Well, thank you all for coming. We hope that you will be able to join us for other events in the speaker series this semester and other DEFCon activities. Our next talk is October 26th at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, for Gisele Colan Lopez's talk, Digital Mapping as a Strategy for Course Community Building. And the link is in the chat. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all. Good to see you.